I move that this House, A, notes the most recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report confirms that greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise and current plans to address climate change are not ambitious enough to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, a threshold scientists believe is necessary to avoid more catastrophic impacts. B, notes that around the world climate change impacts are already causing loss of life and destroying vital ecosystems. C, declares that we are facing a climate emergency. And D, commits to restoring a safe climate by transforming the economy to net zero emissions. Thank you, and I am delighted and honoured to be able to speak to this motion, not only in front of those people who are here today in the chamber, but also the people who are in the gallery who have been significantly active and loud about the importance of declaring this climate emergency, and also anyone who's watching from home who has been desperately waiting for the South Australian Parliament to finally acknowledge the truth that we are indeed in a climate emergency. It's a pretty easy thing to ask, I think, of a government to tell the truth, and yet sometimes it's a little difficult for some. Look, I don't want to belabour the challenges that we face in climate because nearly everyone not only knows it but gets it, understands the challenges. We have only had to look at what we've lived through in South Australia with the intensity of the fires on Kangaroo Island, the intensity that had not been seen before, that was difficult for firefighters to manage and caused catastrophic damage to not only to properties, to people engaging in primary production, but also to a huge part of the wilderness of Kangaroo Island, but also the floods, the drying of the Murray-Darling Basin, and the flooding, which of course is also perversely in some ways part of climate change, because as you add more energy to the system, you get more activity in the climate, and it is devastating. But I think what's important is that we not only acknowledge that the climate has started to change and there is built into the system far more change that is yet to come. But what we need to do is acknowledge the truth that this constitutes an emergency, and then we need to act on that. Now, I acknowledge and congratulate and thank the people who were involved in calling this to the Parliament's attention. Last year, I presented a petition of 10,600 signatures asking that we declare this emergency. It was coordinated by Margaret Hender, who is a magnificent South Australian, who simply said, oh, we need 10,000 signatures, no problem. And of course people were queuing up to sign because they know how important it is that we are honest and that we are truthful about this. We tried before, of course. This motion was up in the Upper House a couple of years ago under the stewardship of Mark Parnell. The Labor Party and opposition supported it, but unfortunately it was not supported by the then government, the then Marshall government. The political response to the reality of this emergency in Australia has been very disappointing for a very long time at the federal level. I think we can all breathe a sigh of relief that finally we have again a federal government that acknowledges the truth of climate change and is prepared to act on it. While in South Australia, the previous Labor government, from Rand to Wetherill, was intent on decarbonising our electricity sector, our electricity emissions, we had the person who's only just been turfed out as Prime Minister fondling coal in Parliament as if it were a joke, as if the idea of carbon polluting the atmosphere were something to be mocked and in fact to be made a display of, which wouldn't have been allowed here. When we had our big battery in order to make our electricity emissions more sustainably low carbon, in Canberra they mocked that as the big banana. No clue about the importance of what needs to happen, not only primarily in order to protect our environment, but significantly to position the South Australian and Australian economy to take advantage of the need to decarbonise, to make ourselves the home of low to zero carbon manufacturing, something that South Australia is within grasp of being able to do, thanks significantly to the previous leadership of Mike Rann and Jay Wetherill. And of course here, when the Liberals were in government here, what we saw was not only the destruction of the environment budget by the ripping out of $34 million in the first environment budget under the then minister, but also a refusal to acknowledge the simple truth that this does constitute an emergency. Now, this government understands that it's not enough to say it's true. You also have to act. And while we have many policies directed towards climate change, the absolute centrepiece is the nearly $600 million being spent on the hydrogen jobs plan. And it's named that very deliberately, because this isn't just about decarbonising our electricity production. It's not just about providing that firming capacity for renewable energy so that we are able finally to guarantee baseload renewable energy electricity, but it is also about using that to create a new economy in South Australia, an economy whose time has come, an economy that will be based on our natural assets of wind and sun, and a South Australian public that has long understood the importance of climate change and has long wanted to see government respond, and have themselves made solar arrays on their houses and been pleased to see wind farms springing up across the state. South Australia deserves to be the first place in the world that's able to generate a truly renewable electricity system that supplies a zero-carbon manufacturing sector. That's what we deserve to see. But we do that by understanding why we're doing that. And we're doing it because humans have put too many greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and it is killing our planet. We need to be honest about that. The impact on biodiversity, the impact on primary production, the impact on people who don't have air conditioning, having extended heat waves, these are all real, these are all already happening, and these will get worse if we don't decarbonise. To decarbonise, we need to be honest. And this motion is, at last, the South Australian Parliament declaring that it understands the seriousness of this situation and is responding to the pleas of the South Australian public to do so. So I commend those who will be voting in favour of this motion, and I commend still more the people, the public of South Australia who've asked for this, who expect it, and who look forward to embracing all the actions that will flow from this government to address climate change.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to support the spirit of this motion, but wish to move an amendment to the motion to strengthen it by, in paragraph A, adding in the words "including biodiversity decline" after the words "catastrophic impacts", deleting paragraph D and inserting 3 new, much stronger paragraphs. D declares that a pathway to curbing these impacts will require swift action. E notes that addressing the changing climate presents significant economic, employment, innovation and technological opportunities for South Australia, and that these opportunities should be actively pursued and supported. And F commits to action to help restore a safe climate by transforming the South Australian economy to net zero emissions by 2050 and to 50% by 2030, and to quarantining the Department for Environment and Water from budget cuts. So that the motion now reads that this Council, or this House, notes the most recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report confirms that greenhouse gases continue to rise, and current plans to address climate change are not ambitious enough to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, a threshold scientists believe is necessary to avoid more catastrophic impacts, including biodiversity decline. B notes that around the world, climate change impacts are already causing loss of life and destroying vital ecosystems. C declares that we are facing a climate emergency. D declares that a pathway to curbing these impacts will require swift action. E notes that addressing the changing climate presents significant economic, employment, innovation and technological opportunities for South Australia, and that these opportunities should be actively pursued and supported. And F commits to action to help restore a safe climate by transforming the South Australian economy to net zero by 2050 and to 50% by 2030, and quarantining the Department for Environment and Water from budget cuts. Deputy Speaker, these amendments are incredibly important from my point of view. And I speak on behalf of all the entire opposition when I say that we believe that we need to continue South Australia's bipartisan trajectory towards net zero by 2050. Importantly, pitching towards that 2030 goal of a 50% reduction in 2005 levels of emissions by 2030. We see that interim goal, which we announced in February 2020, as a powerful goal to action for community, for government, for business, for all South Australians, to continue our journey of not just leading South Australia, not just leading our nation, but leading the world when it comes to our response to climate change, but also grasping hold of the opportunities. One of the great things that has happened over the last decade or decade and a half in South Australia is that ability to decouple the increase in carbon emissions from economic growth. So we thought for some time historically that we couldn't do that. We couldn't see the economy continue to grow and at the same time reduce carbon emissions. But what South Australia has proven, what our work here across parliaments, across governments, across political parties of both persuasions is that you can grab hold of the economic opportunity, create those green industries and transition your economy to a decarbonised economy, creating lots of jobs, creating intellectual property, creating solutions both in emissions mitigation and in adapting our society, because inevitably the climate is changing. South Australia can't stop that by ourselves, so we also have to adapt by greening our cities and towns, by finding ways to sequester carbon through blue carbon opportunities, by creating more resilience along our coastlines so that increased storm events can be more likely to be absorbed and have less impact on our communities and on our environment. So we believe in this, Mr. Speaker, and we believe in the spirit of what the Labour government are doing with this motion today. But we do want to see it move beyond simply gesture. We want to see it move to action, because a climate emergency declaration by itself is worth naught. What we need is true action. We need to see investment in conservation, investment to stop biodiversity decline, because all too often we talk lots and lots about climate change, but not enough about an even greater environmental catastrophe unfolding. David Attenborough describes biodiversity decline as an even more urgent but related crisis. And so I've asked for an amendment to insert biodiversity decline into this motion so that we can step up and respond to biodiversity decline here in South Australia. We know that Australia has an abhorrent record when it comes to the loss of species of flora and fauna. We want to try to do our best to reverse those declines, to see our landscape rewilded and to create opportunities for those native species to both survive and thrive in our landscape. I've also amended this motion, or proposed an amendment to this motion to include the job-creating opportunities and the economic potential of climate change and responding to climate change. The opportunities that come with South Australia being a first mover in this area. A first mover, and I acknowledge the work undertaken by Mike Rann when he was a Premier of this state, by Jay Weatherall when he was the Premier, and that was seamlessly continued when the Marshall Liberal government took office in 2018. And it was my great privilege to be the Minister responsible for climate change policy and climate change action here in South Australia for 4 years, and now to be able to take that role into the leadership of the opposition, maintaining the shadow environment portfolio, to continue to carry the flag for this important portfolio. A portfolio that was all too often left withered and ignored in history in this state. Another amendment that I believe is so important is to say that to take real action, to veer away from simply gesture, we need to quarantine the Environment Department from budget cuts. Now, when Labour were last in power, the Environment Department's budget fell by 60%. The number of rangers working in our environment, in our parks, fell from 300 to only 93. We're up by 45% again. We can go better, and I was delighted to hear that the Labour government are investing in Indigenous rangers in their upcoming budget, and I asked them to continue growing our Rangers workforce, create a workforce of people who understand our national parks. 21% of our state is held in the national parks regime. That is about the size of the UK when you put them all together, and that is a national parks estate which grew substantially during the Marshall Liberal government's time in office. Let's continue that journey. You can't do it if you cut the Department for Environment and Water's budget. That entire budget must be quarantined. We must invest in the natural world. We must invest in the natural capital of our state, because that will secure our native species, but it will also secure the resilience of the landscape so that we continue to be a place which is highly livable, so that we can continue to be a place that proudly produces high quality food and fibre. And so while the Labour Party has a terrible record through their 16 years in office from 2002 to 2018 in terms of the environmental administration in the state, there's a real opportunity now to build that budget and to create resilience in that budget so that we can respond to pressing environmental issues in this state. The budget is small. In the scheme of a state, a whole-of-state budget which is above $20 billion, the Environment Department's budget sits at around about $300 million. It is a small budget, but it is an important budget, and we should aim to work together to grow that budget, to seek federal contributions to projects to grow that budget, to invest in a department which is there first and foremost to look after our national parks, to invest in conservation, to invest in biodiversity, and position our state as a leader in climate change policy, in emissions reduction and in adaptation measures to set this state up for success in the face of the challenges of a changing climate.
The member for Elder.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise in support of this motion, unamended, and in doing so thank the Deputy Premier for her leadership and advocacy both in this place and within our community to protect our environment and urgently address the climate crisis. By declaring a climate emergency in South Australia, the Malinauskas Labor Government is acknowledging that more must be done to address the risks posed by climate change. More must be done to mitigate the effects it is already having on our state's environment and our communities. More must be done to decarbonise our economy. Today we acknowledge that while South Australia has a strong reputation for leading both our nation and the world when it comes to renewable energy, we must move to do more, and we need to do it quickly. I am proud that for 16 years under a Labor government, our state led Australia in renewable energy generation. We moved away from our reliance on fossil fuels and provided an example to other states of what could be achieved. In 2002, it was a South Australian Labor government that set the 26% renewables by 2020 target, harnessing the abundance of wind and solar resources our state has to offer. In 2007, it was a South Australian Labor government that introduced the Climate Change and Greenhouse Emissions Reduction Act, making South Australia the first state to legislate targets to reduce greenhouse emissions. In 2017, it was a South Australian Labor government that built the world's largest lithium-ion battery. It has been Labor governments that have protected our environment, and we will build upon this legacy by taking ambitious and immediate action to address climate change. It will be a Malinauskas Labor government that builds a hydrogen power station, electrolyser and storage facility to generate clean energy and power new jobs and industry in South Australia. There is such an incredible opportunity available to us, and our Labor government is ready to take advantage of the international hunger for green hydrogen. We do this for our environment. We do this for jobs. We do this for our economy. But let me say again, we do this for our environment. The Malinauskas Labor government's hydrogen jobs plan will deliver three key elements: a 200 megawatt hydrogen power station, harnessing South Australian renewable energy to supply cleaner and cheaper power to South Australian businesses, factories, manufacturers and miners, creating new jobs and helping attract new industry to South Australia. We have a 250 megawatt electrical capacity of hydrogen electrolysers, using excess renewable energy. So instead of just switching off the solar panels and just letting that energy go to waste, instead of the need to remotely switch it off like that, we'll unlock a $20 billion pipeline of renewable energy projects in South Australia. We'll deliver a hydrogen storage facility holding the equivalent of 2 months' operation of 3,600 tonnes of hydrogen, providing additional capacity when required. The Malinauskas Labor Government is also moving quickly to introduce legislation to repeal the electric vehicle tax that those opposite seem to think was a great idea, a tax that truly just shows how out of touch Liberals are. In a warming world where we want to decrease our reliance on fossil fuels, they make it more expensive for people to move to electric vehicles. We're repealing that tax because we want to encourage more South Australians to buy an electric car and reduce their emissions. We don't want to make it harder. We have also committed to updating the Climate Change and Greenhouse Emissions Reduction Act to reflect short-term targets, consider carbon budgets and government adaptation plans. But this is just the beginning. The federal election showed us clear as day that Australians are demanding action on climate change. Australians have spoken. They want action and they want it now. They don't want I'll just leave it to the next guy, Liberal climate policy. They don't want climate wars. They understand that reducing carbon footprints isn't enough. They understand that while our individual choices do make a difference, it is collective action and the power of government that will create the transformative environmental change we need to leave an earth that our children can thrive on. I hear them, and I hear the voices of those in my electorate. I hear the voices that come from the younger members of our community who are genuinely scared for their future. Young people like those fantastic activists in Australian Youth Climate Coalition. I hear the voices that come from those who are worried about their grandchildren. I hear the voices of those showing their children why climate action is needed and fighting for them, like Australian Parents for Climate Action. I hear you. The Malinauskas Labor Government hears you. Today, this Parliament hears you. We are in a climate emergency, an emergency we must act upon today.
Before there is another speaker, the member for Morpeth.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I also welcome the opportunity to speak in Parliament today about climate change and net zero. For of course, South Australia is one of the driest places in the world, and so climate and rainfall have been an ever-present challenge to South Australia in terms of its growth, both economic and social. Just in terms of our water supply, a lot of it is sourced from the River Murray, which again relies on rainfall throughout Australia. So effects of the warming climate in the Australian perspective involve reduced average rainfall, more frequent and severe heat waves, which of course then makes South Australia more susceptible to droughts and bushfires. So these are certainly challenges that should be taken seriously here in South Australia. Referring to the motion's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports, they've been released in 2021 and 2022, and in fact the sixth iteration of these reports that give scientific and technical knowledge around climate change. One of those reports, the third one, Mitigation of Climate Change, it does demonstrate the growth in greenhouse gases across the decade. Starting in 1990, the overall carbon dioxide equivalent emissions were 38 gigatons, rising by 2019 to 59 gigatons. And if we break those down into different regions, which the report does, it shows that Eastern Asia makes up 27% of those emissions, North America 12%, Europe 8%. Then breaking that down further, Australians' emissions in 1990 were around 630 megatons, and then decreasing to 530 megatons by 2019. Similarly, South Australia's emissions have reduced down to 24 megatons in 2019, coming from around 36 megatons. So, what this report's do highlight is some of the real complex global challenges that come with mitigating climate change, and that to some extent the temperature rises that have occurred since pre-industrial times may become permanent just because of this huge growth globally. So consequently, addressing climate change has been a priority of the previous Liberal government and remains a priority to those on this side of the House, because we certainly acknowledge the risks and challenges that climate change does pose. But at the same time, South Australia is not the only jurisdiction facing these challenges, and in fact South Australia is better equipped to respond to the challenges but also the opportunities of climate change, more so than any other Australian state and in fact most other places in the world. One of the reasons being is that our state has about 69% of Australia's solar and wind generating resources here that we can leverage to generate large amounts of renewable energy, and as such we have, as those previously have spoken, we're in the process of transitioning our electricity system towards renewable energy, with at this stage over 60% of the state's electricity generated from renewable sources. So this certainly gives us a strong base to meet the challenges of climate change, but importantly, as the leader has pointed out, to really frame it as being able to capture opportunities from low emissions and climate resilient products, and also the services and resources that come from that. Really, so I have to emphasise, there is a commitment to reduce emissions and making sure that they're done so at nation-leading target levels, and that's why we saw the previous Liberal government put in place a clear path for responding to these challenges, but also to build a strong and climate future that is characterised, as I said before, by those nation-leading targets, but also a desire to adapt and pursue climate change-related opportunities, including engaging with business and the market, because we know that produces growth here and then flows through to jobs. The motion itself, it talks about plans, and in December of 2020, the former Liberal government released its Climate Change Action Plan, and it was developed with input from renowned climate change expert Professor Ross Garneau. It covered the 5-year period from 2021 to 2025, and it really focused on 7 key areas that can provide a pathway to achieving those net zero emissions by 2050. And it really did show that South Australia was on track to reach net 100% of our electricity demand with renewable energy by 2030. And in so doing, this gave us confidence as a government to set the goal of reducing the overall emissions in South Australia of 50% by 2030. And you'll see here in the motion, the amended motion the leader moves, it makes reference to that. And additionally, because of this momentum and this plan and the vision it provides, it made it very foreseeable to achieve a level of renewable energy that would be 5 times more than the current local grid demand by 2050, I should mention. But it is important that as we go through this transition to renewable energy, it needs to be done so in an orderly manner that not only generates clean electricity, but just as importantly, provides electricity that is affordable and also reliable as well. We had a number of focus areas to achieve that as a government. One of those was fast-tracking the construction of the interconnector between South Australia and New South Wales that will have a capacity of 800 megawatts, over 200,000 households equivalent to. And that will allow South Australia, as we build our renewable energy, to be able to export it, because of course, if we can only generate electricity that can be used here in SA, it does provide a cap on what we can create. So by being able to export it, we can get to that net 100% quickly, and also help other states as well in their decarbonisation efforts. More importantly, it also provides stability. So when it's not always wind here, we can import it, but as I said, by exporting more than we import, we can have net 100% renewable energy as well. Another fantastic outcome of that was that generated investment that made other major world players, international players, domestic players, want to invest here in South Australia. We had NEO investing $3 billion in Goyder South. AMP Energy, $2 billion worth, all up, around $7 billion worth of investment already committed, and then that brought out further investment, a pipeline, not only on hand of actual progress, but also planned generation capacity of upwards and approaching 16 gigawatts. So that's over 5 times our current peak demand here. So that's also creating nearly $20 billion worth of investment. So that's economic opportunity being leveraged by this orderly transition that's been set in place. Quickly, in the time remaining, other initiatives, the massive home battery scheme that saw South Australia projected over the next 5 years to be able to have about 20% of the household batteries in this nation here in South Australia. That reduces the cost not only for those households, but importantly it reduces peak demand across the board, so reduces costs for all consumers in South Australia. So that's a way of keeping prices down as well. In terms of being able to further grow economic opportunity, there's massive opportunities in using that renewable energy to create hydrogen. I won't go into the details of that, but importantly we recognise that could be a key way for us to further grow investment in renewable energy. We work with international companies, we work with major companies who are experienced in this field and to attract funding around Port the Knife and Hydrogen Hub. That's going to be a legacy of the former government to stand us in stead for years to come. It will provide a massive way that other nations can also decarbonise, not just Australia itself. If I could quickly touch on the other elements to what the leader was noting is the fact that we really need to, yes, we can do mitigation techniques, but we also need to be realistic. I spoke around the global emissions at 59 gigatons compared to 24 megatons, so that's 59,000 megatons. So really the percentage of South Australia. So yes, we can do our bit, but really we need to be realistic. We need to adapt because we can't control necessarily what other countries are doing. They're in various stages of development, and they've got maybe other issues that mean it's harder for them to decarbonise. And so we did a great deal of work in terms of coastal protection. That's where rising sea levels will have an impact. We also importantly invested heavily in our national parks. I think 20%, over 20% of the land mass in South Australia was covered by national parks. That provides biodiversity corridors, and I think that's another legacy. One in particular, the Glenville National Park, the second national park in metropolitan Adelaide. That's going to be important from a biodiversity perspective as well. So the amendments that the leader has made really flesh out the importance of rapid action, the importance of actually setting targets as well, being quite specific, so we can be held to account, but also that especially the younger generation who wants to reassure us they can see that we are taking action, and they can rest assured that we are.
Okay. Any other speakers? If the Minister speaks, we'll close the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I will thank everyone who has participated in this debate. Wonderful contributions, and I also thank particularly Liv Morford, who brings quite an academic and cast of mind. He did extremely well in engineering and understands probably in a lot more technical detail than I do, some of the mechanics that sit behind how we can unleash power of hydrogen. And also acknowledge that the leader has always recognised that climate change is real. And I'm grateful that we have politics in South Australia where we're not arguing about it less. I will just briefly note that our side of Parliament will not be supporting the amendments, and we take that position for 3 reasons. Because the spirit of the amendments are not unreasonable, but there are 3 reasons why we will be opposing those today, and it's a pity that we have to get into trying to change it and then having to oppose that, but I think these are important reasons. The first is that with caught between the repetition that's in it, nearly everything that is in the amendment is effectively just reworking and embellishing what is already in the amendment. So in the motion it adds nothing. And if we did so, if we decided that we wanted to be a bit more verbose on the subject, we would be then inconsistent with the Legislative Council, where I understand the same amendment has been moved, but the intention is of the majority is to oppose that, including crossbenchers from the Greens and from SA Best. And I see that the version that's been put here in fact says that this council, so presumably originated from the other place and has found its way down here. And the second reason that we oppose these motions is it appears essentially to be suddenly a road to Damascus moment of realising it was the wrong thing to oppose this last time when the Honourable Mark Parnell put it forward and the Labor Party supported it, and having found themselves on the wrong side of history, as one might think, there's an attempt to claim ownership rather than simply supporting the motion as it is, and it's going through the Legislative Council, trying to say, well, we're better and we're putting some more words in, so that means it's ours as well. I think that's a pretty poor reason to amend a motion. And the third reason is the degree of hypocrisy that sits in elements of this, in particular. The identification of quarantining one part of government, the environment water part from budget cuts. Now this comes from a leader who in his first budget, as I mentioned earlier, cut $34 million out of the Environment Department, and in fact specifically took $11.6 million out of climate change in the Environment Department. So the level of hypocrisy is almost breathtaking. It was interesting that the Rangers were mentioned, and of course we were on the weekend proud to, with my friend and colleague Kai Ma, announcing that the budget will contain new money for 15 Aboriginal Rangers in South Australia, which will be significant for the Aboriginal community rangers themselves, but particularly for the way in which visitors are able to experience and understand the importance of the cultural attachment and understanding of the nature of the country. But when the leader was the Environment Minister first came in the Aboriginal Rangers, the Environment Department absorbed those costs. It wasn't new money to say here and to get some. They had to rearrange their existing resources, cut other things in order to fund those rangers. So I think the third reason not to support amendments is if there's a degree of hypocrisy that's involved with them, and there's a pretty high dose in that. And let's leave that aside. That's a little distasteful, because what we want here is bipartisanship, and I'm hopeful that in fact we will get support on both sides of the chamber for the original motion, assuming that the amendments will indeed fail. What we're doing here today, if that is the case, is historic for South Australia, and in fact is rare in Australia for a state-level parliament to decide that it, in both chambers, wants to acknowledge the truth of climate change. In both chambers and on both sides of politics has parties that accept the reality of climate change and are prepared to do something about it. I expect the return to Parliament for too long with some amendments to the legislation that governs climate change in South Australia in order to be specific about targets. I think it's essential that we continue to drive our achievements. We should celebrate what we've done, we should drive our achievements forward, but we should above all be truly who already know what's going on, who already have a degree of fury for the inaction that they've seen today, and want us to be honest and want us to act. And as a parliament, if we can do that on all sides of parliament and in both chambers, then I think we can give some confidence to the youth of today that we hear what they are saying and we will be acting.